Elara had dedicated 30 long years to the town's library. She knew every shelf, every author, almost every regular visitor. The scent of old paper and polish was her daily perfume. It was her place, her sanctuary, her work. Then, one Monday morning, the letter arrived. Official, cold, budget cuts, the library branch was closing, permanently. Her position eliminated, just like that. Elara felt a sudden chill, a hollowness spreading within. Her world, so carefully ordered, began to tremble. The final weeks were a somber countdown. Colleagues offered sympathetic smiles, their own futures uncertain. She packed her few personal items into a worn cardboard box. Each book reshelved felt like a painful goodbye. On her last day, she walked out into the afternoon sun. But the familiar street seemed alien, unwelcoming. Her steady rhythm of life had abruptly stopped. A deafening silence replaced the comforting hum of the library. She felt adrift, a ship without a rudder or a port. Despair, a heavy cloak, settled upon her shoulders. She sat in her quiet living room, the box at her feet. What now? The question echoed in the stillness. At 62, where did one begin again? The thought of job interviews, of proving her worth anew, was daunting. A fear, sharp and icy, gripped her heart. Fear of financial hardship, yes. But more than that, fear of being invisible, of having no purpose. The future stretched before her, a vast grey unknown. The days that followed were long and shapeless. The morning alarm no longer rang with purpose. The hours, once filled with tasks and interactions, now yawned empty. She would watch the world from her window. People rushing to work, children to school, life moving on without her. It felt as if she was fading, becoming a ghost in her own life. The storm of joblessness had hit with full force, and Elara felt utterly alone in its path. She wondered if the sun would ever feel warm again. Weeks melted into a month, then two. The initial shock slowly gave way to a persistent, dull ache. A deep sadness settled in Elara's heart. Mornings were the hardest, waking to no set routine, no place she needed to be, no tasks awaiting her skills. This emptiness was a constant, unwelcome companion. She missed the smell of books. She missed the quiet chatter. She missed feeling like she belonged somewhere. Her identity felt tied to the job she no longer had. Fear became a familiar shadow, whispering doubts. Could she manage on her small savings? For how long? What if she fell ill? Who would care? She tried to be brave when friends called. "I'm fine," she'd say, forcing a smile into her voice. But inside she felt anything but fine. She felt lost. The world seemed to be spinning on, vibrant and busy, while she was stuck, treading water in a sea of uncertainty. Her small apartment sometimes felt like a lonely island. Sleep offered little escape, often disturbed by anxious thoughts. She would lie awake, replaying her last days at the library, wondering if she could have done something differently. A sense of worthlessness began to creep in. Was she no longer useful? Had her best years passed her by? These questions circled in her mind, relentless and cruel. She tried reading, her lifelong comfort, but found it hard to concentrate. The words on the page seemed to mock her own unwritten future. The path ahead was obscured by a thick fog of despair. Sometimes a wave of anger would surface. Anger at the impersonal decision that had upended her life. Anger at a system that could discard experience so easily. But the anger would quickly fade, leaving behind only more sadness. She felt like a small boat tossed in a relentless storm. Each day was a struggle to simply stay afloat. The joy she once found in simple things seemed distant. A heavy weariness settled deep within her soul. She yearned for a sign, a glimmer of light in the darkness. One particularly grey afternoon, Elara found herself tidying a bookshelf. Her fingers brushed against a book she hadn't touched in years. It was her mother's old Bible, its cover soft and worn. A faint memory surfaced, her mother reading it by lamplight. A sense of peace associated with those distant moments. She hesitated, feeling a strange pull. Could there be comfort within these ancient pages? She had not attended church regularly for a long time. Her faith felt like a distant, almost forgotten melody. She carried the Bible to her armchair, its weight familiar. Dust motes danced in the dim light as she opened it. The thin pages whispered as she turned them. She didn't know where to begin reading. The words seemed dense, the names unfamiliar in places. Yet just holding it, feeling the smooth paper, brought a tiny comfort. A small, almost imperceptible shift in the oppressive atmosphere. It was a connection to something older, something beyond her present pain. A tiny flicker of curiosity began to glow within her. Later that evening, she remembered childhood prayers, simple words, phrases of trust and petition. She hadn't prayed like that in decades. It felt awkward, but in the quiet solitude of her room she tried. "God, if you're there," she whispered, "I don't know what to do." It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't a grand theological statement. It was just a small, honest plea from a weary heart, a tentative reaching out into the vast unknown, a fragile admission of her own helplessness. This act of prayer, this opening of the old Bible, did not bring instant miracles. The sadness did not magically lift. The future did not suddenly become clear. But something subtle began to change within Elara. It was like a tiny seed being planted in parched ground, a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't entirely alone, a faint stirring of an old, almost forgotten hope. The darkness was still present, deep and wide, but now there was a single, flickering candle in its midst, and that tiny light made all the difference. Elara started a new, small routine. Very small. Each morning, before the silence of the day could fully take hold, she would make a cup of tea. And she would sit with her mother's Bible for a few minutes. Sometimes she just read a few verses. Sometimes a whole psalm. The words didn't always make perfect sense, but she wasn't looking for perfect sense. She was looking for a whisper of comfort. And sometimes she found it. She found herself drawn to the Psalms, poems of praise, yes, but also poems of deep sorrow. David crying out to God in his distress, Asaph wondering if God had forgotten him. She realized that her feelings of despair were not unique. Others long ago had walked through similar valleys of shadow. They had questioned, they had wept, they had feared, and yet, through it all, they had clung to God. This shared humanity across centuries was a quiet comfort. Her prayers began to feel a little less awkward. She started talking to God more like a friend, sharing her small anxieties about the day, voicing her fears about the dwindling savings, admitting her loneliness, her sense of being adrift. She wasn't asking for grand solutions anymore. She was just sharing the burden, laying it down. And in that sharing she found a measure of peace, a quiet sense that she was heard. The heavy blanket of hopelessness didn't disappear overnight. There were still days when the grey clouds gathered thickly, but they didn't feel quite as suffocating as before. Small shafts of light would break through, a moment of gratitude for a sunny morning, a flicker of interest in a passing news story. A fragile hope began to take root in her heart. It was delicate, like a new shoot, pushing through hard soil. But it was there, and it was growing. One Tuesday, driven by a need to escape her own four walls, Elara decided to visit the local community centre. She hadn't been inside for many years, not since a craft fair long ago. She just wanted a different view, a different set of sounds. Perhaps a friendly face, a brief distraction from her thoughts. The centre was bustling with activity. Children's laughter echoed. Seniors were playing cards in one corner. A yoga class was in session. It felt like a small, vibrant hub of life. A stark contrast to the quietude of her apartment. As she wandered through the main hall, a notice board caught her eye. It was covered in flyers, local events, classes, requests for help. One small handwritten sign stood out. Volunteers needed children's story hour. Share the magic of reading. Elara paused. Reading. Children. A faint warmth spread through her. A distant memory. She had always loved children's books, their wonder, their imagination. At the library, story time had been her secret joy. But that was then, this was now. Her first instinct was to dismiss the thought. "I'm too old for that now," a familiar voice of doubt whispered. "They'll want someone younger, more energetic." The old insecurities, her companions of recent months, resurfaced. What could she possibly offer them? She felt rusty, out of practice. The thought of putting herself forward was intimidating. It was easier to remain in the shadows, unnoticed, safer perhaps, but also lonelier. She almost turned away, ready to retreat back to her solitude. But then another voice, quieter, gentler, spoke within her. Perhaps it was the echo of her morning prayers. Perhaps it was a nudge from that tiny, growing seed of hope. "Just ask," it seemed to suggest. "What harm can it do?" She hesitated, her heart beating a little faster. It was a small step. a tiny movement against the tide of her despair. Taking a deep breath, Elara slowly walked toward the reception desk. She would simply inquire, that was all. A small step onto an unexpected path. The young woman at the community center desk was kind. Her name was Sarah, and she had a warm, welcoming smile. Elara explained a little hesitantly that she had seen the flyer. She mentioned her many years working in the library. Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh, that's wonderful," she exclaimed. "We've been desperate for someone to help with Story Hour." The previous volunteer had moved away suddenly. "The children missed their weekly stories," Sarah explained. Elara felt a tiny flutter in her chest, a spark of something like excitement. Sarah asked if Elara might be willing to try it out, just one session, to see how it felt, no pressure. Elara, surprised at her own boldness, found herself agreeing. A mix of nervousness and anticipation bubbled within her. She spent the next few days in a state of focused preparation. She carefully selected a few of her favorite classic children's books. She practiced reading them aloud, trying out different voices for characters. It felt good to have a task, a purpose, however small, something to look forward to work towards. The day of her first story hour arrived. Elara felt a familiar flutter of nerves, like stage fright. What if the children were bored? What if she stumbled over words? Sarah led her to a cozy corner of the center. Brightly colored mats were spread on the floor, and a small group of children, perhaps 6 or 7 of them, sat waiting. Their eyes were wide with expectation, eager, curious. Elara sat down on a small stool, a book in her trembling hands. She took a deep breath and began to read. And then something truly wonderful happened. As she read, the words came alive. She found herself easily slipping into the rhythm of the story. The children listened, utterly captivated. They giggled at the funny parts. Their eyes grew wide at the exciting bits. For that 1 hour, Elara forgot all about her job loss. She forgot her anxieties, her loneliness, her fears about the future. She was completely present, immersed in the world of the story, sharing its magic with these bright, shining faces. A forgotten part of her had awakened. That first story hour was not a one-time event. The children loved Story Lady Elara, as they quickly named her, and Elara found she loved being there with them. She agreed to volunteer every week. Soon her Tuesday mornings became the highlight of her week. She would spend Monday evenings preparing, choosing just the right books. Sometimes she brought simple props, a puppet, a colorful scarf. The community center started to feel like a welcoming space, a place where she was needed, where she belonged. A remarkable change began to unfold within Elara. The heavy cloak of sadness she had worn for so long started to feel lighter. It hadn't vanished completely, not yet. Grief takes its time, but it was no longer the defining feature of her days. Now there was anticipation, there was purpose, there was joy. She found herself humming as she walked to the center. She smiled more easily, more genuinely. The lines of worry on her face seemed to soften. A new light shone in her eyes. Her friends noticed the difference immediately. "Elara, you look wonderful," they would say. "What's changed?" And she would tell them about the children, about the stories. Her voice would fill with an enthusiasm they hadn't heard in months. She realized that this new role, unexpected as it was, filled a deep need. It wasn't just about reading stories. It was about connecting, about sharing, about nurturing. It was about feeling valued and making a difference, however small. Her life, once feeling empty, was now brimming with a quiet, gentle joy. The path that had seemed so dark and uncertain after losing her job had, through a series of small steps and a willingness to try, led her to this unexpected place of fulfillment. She was no longer just Elara, the former librarian. She was Story Lady Elara, a bringer of joy to young hearts. This new identity felt right, it felt true. The storm had indeed passed, and in its wake something beautiful and unexpected had begun to blossom. Her heart felt full again, overflowing with a quiet gratitude. One morning, during her quiet time with her mother's Bible, Elara's eyes fell upon a passage she hadn't noticed before. It was in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 11. She read the words slowly, carefully. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The words seemed to leap off the page and settle directly into her heart. It felt as if God himself was speaking them just for her. She thought back over the past few months, the pain of losing her job, the despair, the fear. At the time it had felt like harm, it had felt like the end of hope. But now, looking back from this new vantage point, she saw things differently. She saw a bigger picture. If she hadn't lost her library job, she never would have visited the community centre. She never would have seen that little flyer. She never would have discovered this new passion, this new purpose. The old door had to close for a new one to open. The verse from Jeremiah resonated deeply with her experience. God's plans were not always clear to her at the time. They often unfolded in mysterious, unexpected ways. What had seemed like a devastating storm, a true disaster, had actually been a redirection, a divine rerouting. The Lord had indeed not harmed her, not ultimately. He had guided her through the darkness towards a future she couldn't have imagined. A future filled with a different kind of prosperity, the richness of joy and purpose. A future brimming with hope. Her faith, once a tiny flickering candle, now burned with a steady flame. She understood that God's presence wasn't just for the good times. He was there in the storms too, working silently, shaping events. His love was constant. His plans trustworthy, even when unseen. The challenge of her job loss had, in a surprising way, become a blessing. It had stripped away the old, the familiar, and forced her to seek something new, something deeper. It had led her back to faith, and through faith to a new calling. Jeremiah's promise was not just an ancient text, it was her living reality. Elara's story is a gentle reminder for all of us. Life can bring sudden storms, unexpected losses, times of deep despair. Perhaps you are in such a storm right now. The winds of change might be howling around you. The future may look dark and uncertain. You might feel lost, you might feel alone, just as Elara did. Your heart might be heavy with sadness or fear. These feelings are real, they are valid, but they are not the end of your story. Remember Elara, remember her journey from emptiness to joy. She did not find her way out of the storm by her own strength alone. She turned to faith. She reached for a hand greater than her own. Even a small act of turning, a whispered prayer, can make a difference. God sees you. He knows your struggles. He has not forgotten you. He has plans for you too. Good plans, plans filled with hope, plans for a future. Just as he promised in Jeremiah 29:11. His love for you is unwavering, even in the fiercest tempest. Sometimes the greatest blessings are hidden within our greatest challenges. The path may seem closed off, the way forward impossible, but God often works in ways we cannot see or understand at the moment. He can turn endings into new beginnings. He can transform periods of barrenness into seasons of fruitfulness. The very storm that threatens to overwhelm you might be the very thing that redirects you to a beautiful undiscovered shore, a shore where new purpose and new joy await. Trust that He is with you, guiding your steps. So if you're facing hard times, do not lose heart. Hold on to that tiny flicker of hope. Nurture it. Seek comfort, seek guidance, seek God. He is faithful. He is good. His promises are true. The storm will not last forever. The clouds will eventually part, and when they do, you will see the sunshine again. You will find your footing. You will discover your own new path. You are stronger than you think, and you are never, ever truly alone. You will get through this. Believe it.